Hello and welcome to Ethical Leadership, Voices from Aotearoa, New Zealand, a podcast series commissioned by the Brian Picot Chair in Ethical Leadership, Aritahi, at Victoria University of Wellington, and produced by advisory firm Picot. This podcast series aims to demystify ethics and make ethical leadership a concept we all become more fluent in and a skill we all become more nimble with. My name is Hélène Malandin, Director of Pocket Knife, and it is my pleasure to be your host for this episode of our podcast series. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Rebecca Rawls. Rebecca Rawls is the inaugural Chief Executive Officer of Sport Integrity Commission, Te Kahu Ranui, that was established as an independent Crown entity on 1st of July 2024. Rebecca spearheaded the creation of the Commission as the Director of the Integrity Transition Program, guiding foundational legislation and overseeing the folding of Drug-Free Sport New Zealand into this broader integrity mandate. Prior to this, Rebecca accumulated extensive public sector leadership experience with New Zealand Police, the Serious Fraud Office, Department of Corrections, and as Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Sport New Zealand. A former elite athlete, Rebecca represented Aotearoa, New Zealand as a dual international in both football with the Football Ferns and cricket with the White Ferns. Rebecca is of Maori descent and affiliates to the Ngāti Porou iwi. So it's my pleasure to welcome Rebecca on the podcast today. Rebecca, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Helen.
Rebecca, tell me, since you took on the role of inaugural CEO of the Sport Integrity Commission about a year ago, you have been very vocal in a positive way about integrity threats that sport and recreation participants face in Aotearoa, including, I understand, issues that are specific to Aotearoa's cultural context as well. It'd be really helpful to start this interview with a plain English definition of what integrity looks like when it comes to sport and recreation. So in your own words, if the Commission was to deliver on its mission and, let's say, work itself out of a job, what would integrity look like then?
Sure. I mean, it's probably easiest to talk a bit more about what integrity doesn't look like. And through our policy work, we found out very quickly that it's almost impossible to define integrity from one person's perspective. And in our context, participants include not just those people playing and experiencing the sport and recreation, but also support staff and officials and administrators. So obviously it's very, very broad. And our objective, our role is really simply to ensure that sport and recreation in New Zealand environments are safe and fair. So as a very simple answer to your question, that is what we would be looking for in a utopic kind of world in the future, is that environments are safe and fair and people aren't harmed further by them. And we seek to do that by preventing and addressing what we call threats to integrity. And that's when I talk about what things can put that at jeopardy and promoting participant trust and confidence and integrity within our sector.
That's interesting. So the language, safe of fear, safe of threats, it's really interesting because it's grounded into what you don't want the experience to be like. It's grounded into the fear. It's grounded into the threats. And we want to move away from this. So you have mentioned a couple of more positive words here in terms of confidence. And do you want to tell me about this? Because obviously you were at the very roots of the creation of the Commission. Why do we have to start from a place of fear and threat?
So I guess to make an environment safe and fair, we have to make sure we're really clear about what is not acceptable. And that for our work became much clearer for people to explain. And so that includes things like doping in sport, betting activity or manipulation of sport, racism, discrimination that's unlawful as per the Human Rights Act, bullying, violence, abuse, misconduct, corruption and other fraud. And so those behaviours are very much, when we describe a threat to integrity, that's what those include. And also, we are responsible for ensuring that organisations responsible for preventing those threats are meeting their obligations. So while it doesn't feel very strength-based to say these are the prohibited behaviours effectively, when we looked at defining what it would look like, there were a lot more gaps and much harder to sort of articulate, and then it's open to interpretation a lot more. So in order to achieve our purpose, that's why we defined it in that way.
This is really interesting. And this is bringing to me a thought around what you've already shared with me around the values-led approach of the Commission as well. And I think as I'm hearing you, talking, I'm thinking about that balance maybe between the work that the Commission does on the regulatory framework, as well, mixed with or woven with the values approach, which is probably a much more strength-based, as you say, take on your activities and behaviors at the Commission. So with the risk of simplifying here, it feels like the Commission offers, is dedicated to an approach that weaves regulation with values. So improving the regulatory framework in a way that is grounded and informed in shared values on the softer side, maybe the more human side. Could you tell us a bit more about this approach and this balance?
Absolutely. So very simply put, what we call our matariki, or our vision, is literally doing what's right together. And so mate tika, mato pono, and te aroha, which is with truth, integrity, and honesty and compassion. So that is us as an organisation, and obviously we seek to work that through into the sector. And because regulation, which is quite a harsh word, it is about compliance at the end of the day and preventing harm. So that has to look like, a good old Braithwaite triangle with awareness and education at the bottom. But for us, it needs to form a significant part of that, so that over time, and our theory of change is very much recognising the fact that this is a behavioural change we're seeking in the sector, and it's a long-term, probably, I won't put a number on it, but many years change. And in order to achieve that, the awareness raising is very, very important, and then into the education space as well. We saw that very early, and our organisational strategy is informed by a kakahu metaphor, a cloak metaphor. And we often talk about whatever interactions we have with a participant, they should feel cared for when they wear our kakahu, whether they are seeking help, whether they have made a mistake, or whether they simply just want some advice, or they want to learn something about how to do their job better. So those values and that values-based approach are hugely important for us. And we know that that's how the sector works and the sector responds. And we know that from a lot of the work we've done.
Amazing. So maybe if we pick up on this, because it's really interesting, and I love the metaphor of the cloak. In any of the areas, I'd love to hear a real example, Rebecca, like in any of the areas the Commission works in. You've mentioned a few already, protection of children, anti-doping, match fixing. Could you share with us maybe a real life example of how the team at the Commission may have worked with a partner organization around one of these issues, demonstrating these values, demonstrating how, or helping someone put the cloak on, and how this happens, how this, eventuated in this particular instance?
Absolutely. And I'll start by saying anyone who we deal with or who are involved in something we're looking at, we provide support and counselling to. And we've partnered with a specific counselling provider who has much more diagnostic ability and can refer on. So, and that can be someone who makes an allegation, or it can be someone who is the subject of an allegation. So it's important that people understand that is wrapped around no matter what. And a couple of examples would be, I'll talk broadly because of the nature of it, but in anti-doping, often people test positive for banned substances, and it's either a mistake and they've taken it inadvertently, but they can still be liable for that, or it's because they were trying to get better and just didn't understand. So what we often do is make sure that to the extent possible they've been educated. So there's every option for them to understand ahead of time. And if they haven't been educated for whatever reason, then that can be a mitigation. So we recognise the importance of that. And also in anti-doping, we make sure that we offer them legal support as well, but also as we work through, depending on what the circumstances are. For example, if someone is tested positive for something that they may need for a therapeutic purpose, they can get an exemption beforehand, but sometimes that doesn't happen. So we make sure we facilitate basically every possible mitigant that they can possibly access and work through it that way.
So it sounds almost like there's a maybe not personalized approach, but I mean, from the example you're giving me here, there's obviously time, energy that's invested into understanding a particular situation and therefore providing with an appropriate answer. I assume the Commission works with partner organizations in order to facilitate this process. You're not hands-on in all of these situations, are you? How does the Commission ensure the integrity of the process that maybe a partner organization, if I'm correct, facilitate on the ground? Do you need your partner organizations to put on the cloak themselves, I suppose is what is coming to mind?
Great way to put it. Absolutely. So we work with sport and recreation organisations. If there is an issue, we have an early discussion to understand and agree who manages that. If the organisation keeps it, we'll still support from a distance. We'll provide that counselling I mentioned. We might support from a resource perspective, but also program in some check-ins to make sure things are going okay. So yeah, we wrap the cloak around them and the organisation to ensure that that's the best outcomes are achieved. And really, we've got to remember in this situation, we're trying to get people through a process so they can continue to work together. Often with regulation, like for example, in banking or something like that, or another dispute, the parties will never work together again. There's a dispute and then they part and they don't see each other again. So that resolution is quite clean, whereas this very much has to be built around the possibility that there's two parties who have an issue with each other that still need to be in the same team or in the same club or work together. So we have to take that personalised approach, and we've got good resolution and early facilitation skills and experience with our people to make sure that our goal is usually to make sure something is resolved at its earliest and as close to inception as possible, so at the earliest point.
Now, picking up on your point around, like there are some, or maybe I mentioned that before, there are some cultural-specific issues in sport and recreation in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and you've just mentioned a Pacifica cultural partner as well. Could you give me an example of what that may look like? Do you work with counterparts in other places in the world and are able to see the cultural difference there, maybe?
Yeah, thanks. We do. And from the start of building the commission, we were very, very deliberate to make it, New Zealand centric and appropriate for New Zealanders, and that means a very important part of that is ensuring a te ao Māori and a tanga Māori basis. So that is something we've deliberately baked in right through, and that is every day given us so much richness, whether we're deciding on a process or we're engaging with people. So that is something we've talked a lot to particularly our Australian counterparts about, and that they're doing some great work over there around reconciliation and some of their First Nations people. So we have a very close relationship with them, and where they sometimes help us with some of the technical operational things, we actually help them from a cultural perspective, because they view us as a country that has worked hard and been successful, although we would never say that completely to fold it in. And then, when we look further afield for some of our Asian counterparts, for example, Japanese, their culture is very specific and very respectful, and that's built into a lot of their practices as well. So we do get to see other examples from around the world. But I think what is important is that the participants in each of those countries can see themselves in a process, and that's certainly what we've tried to achieve.
Yeah, excellent. I may bring us back to the regulation side of things for a minute, because you and the Commission recently introduced the new Code of Integrity for Sport and Recreation, Integrity Code in short. I understand the code is here to help organizations strengthen their integrity game by creating safer and fairer sport and recreation environments through applying consistent standards. So consistent standards that I assume were not there before. And I think you referred to the code in the media as another start line to further strengthen the culture of integrity in the sector. Can you tell us a bit more about how the code came to be and what hopes you have for its implementation and impact?
Great. So the code is what we call secondary legislation. So not unlike the traffic rules, except much cooler. So what it does is it tries to set out in plain language what the minimum standards are for the sector, as you described. So what we want to do with the sector, and I talked about behavioural change before, is build that culture of integrity together. So the code is absolutely another start line, and whether you're close to it or a long way from it, it's clear and it's really demonstrates what those minimum standards are. Certainly achievable, and things that we would think most organisations are doing to some extent already. So that's things like prohibiting behaviours that are a threat to integrity, like I talked about before. It's proactively safeguarding children and young people and adults at risk. So calling out those more vulnerable people in our sector. It's ensuring there's an effective and fair dispute resolution process in relation to integrity, so that organisations have those, so that if we are helping them through that, then it's really clear what they are. And then also making sure that when they adopt the code, they cooperate with the Commission and work with us so that we can work together to do these things. And then lastly, providing information to their members about what that looks like, and what that means. So hopefully covering all the areas, and important to know that it's a voluntary code as well. So it's and that's a deliberate step that may not always be the case, but at the moment it is. And that's again about that probably partnership approach that the sector and sport and recreation are used to. What it also means is they can see what's expected and decide themselves as an organisation and in their communities when it's best to adopt the code. So that helps us hopefully achieve our purpose of addressing those threats to integrity by setting the minimum standards, requiring those organisations to have the policies in place, and then prescribing our role and how we support them through that. I should say also that the minimum standards are exactly that. There's no sky. The organisations can shoot above those as well. And often, in a couple of occasions, there are organisations who have specific needs that mean they can't quite follow the code to the letter, but we can work with them to make sure that they're still providing a safe and fair environment. So hopefully over time, I guess, everyone will adopt the code. That language of minimum standards and that culture of integrity building will be really normalised, and people will be able to sort of, rather than us pointing out what's right and wrong, self-regulate and peer-regulate in this sector.
And you've mentioned collaboration to create the code. Can you talk to us a bit more about this process and how you facilitated a process of co-creation or collaboration, or what did it look like?
Sure. So I've touched on our work with Te Ao Māori and Te Kao Māori, but we formalised that with an advisory group called Te Ope Tāmero, which has a link in translation to the kakahu. It's about the crew, if you like, or the group that roll the harakekis who weave the kakahu. So, which they came up with themselves. So we've been working with them the whole time as well, and then through the code, we worked with them. We consulted with Pacifica, and we've since initiated a Pacific engagement group. We had consultation sessions with sports and, obviously the sector itself, but also their youth and athlete councils. We worked through some forum with disability organisations, the rainbow communities. So our legislation calls out the priority populations we must seek views from, and so we were very, very deliberate to do that so that we could actually say we've consulted with the sector. And I'd have to say the code looks very different than when our first draft, at what we thought it might look like, but it is something we can really hold high and be confident that the sector has had a big part in this, so that when we come to look at it again, they'll be able to tell us what's worked and what hasn't and what else needs to be in there.
Amazing. So do you think this process and the code now offers maybe a useful springboard for further engagements within the sector, in between organizations, amongst organizations? Do you think it's a shift in terms of how organizations may engage and bring forward, maybe thanks to the experience of putting together the code?
Yeah, look, I do, because it has an awareness raising effect as well, but also because it brings a consistency and a clarity to it. It naturally forms the basis of those conversations going forward, and we will hopefully and continue to, and it's still very early days, but build those relationships that can be enduring. And I talked about our Māori Vopu, who are probably the most mature of those. So now we're working with them to help us design culturally appropriate resolution services, and so all those things are built into the code as well. And even outside the code, where the anti-doping is in a different code, we're working with them to help us understand how we might collect anti-doping samples in a culturally appropriate way and things like that. So absolutely, as soon as you start talking and people, you want to hear from them what they need and want and how they see themselves in it, it opens up the door for so many more rich conversations about other ways that can happen. So I am confident and hopeful, but optimistic that those conversations can continue.
And what role will or is the Commission playing in fostering further conversations within the sector? I mean, sectors all face the same issue in terms of capacity, right? And people always have capacity to dedicate time to exchanging and to transfer of knowledge and collaboration. Is it something that the Commission is thinking of or has a plan for? What does it look like?
Yeah, no, we are. And I think you've made a couple of really important points there about, not just a one-touch engagement. That's really important. And we know that, one of the key principles of engagement is closing the loop and making sure people can see where their input has been, or that has been listened to, and where it's showing up. So we have a team that we've got some sort of relationship managers, if you like, who will work with sports around the code and around what that means, but also a participant and engagement or community engagement manager and a team that will specifically look at how we continue to engage those populations and how they change over time, and who else we need to be talking to, and how we best get information from them. And look, that depends very much on age and stage and culture and language barriers and other accessibility things we need to work through. So how we're responding to that or dealing with that, if you like, is by making sure we have some dedicated resource to it, so that person and that team have the mandate to kind of explore those areas.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm curious because you've mentioned a few things that, brings my mind back to your point on theory of change or your impact model. Remember what language you used. And obviously everything we've talked about so far is a node somewhere in this theory of change from the standards, the regulation to the culture you've explained is being fostered and supported, to the capability building and strengthening the culture of the sector. Do you have, out of interest, a theory of change, or I mean, it would be a moving feast, I'm sure, but is there something there that you're working on out of interest?
What we're working on is a framework or a regulatory model that encapsulates that theory of change. And we know it's behavioural, and we know that there's a big component of meeting people where they are to make sure that behavioural change, that the shift is recognised, that people know how they need to access it and how they can support that and why. And obviously, the why is very important. So we are still working with the sector on that. And as the code adoption picks up, and we're expecting to sort of have the first organisations adopting that in the next sort of few months, and work through with them to make sure that we keep our theory and our approach adjustable and flexible, because we don't want to get caught going down a path that only works for some people. So very much around making sure people understand they can access the information they need, meeting them where they are, and having them understand what the future could look like. And it sort of comes back to, I guess, why we exist, and that's because we want people to take part in safe environments where they can fully enjoy the benefits that sport and recreation provides. They're respected for who they are, where they come from, their inherent value and their identity. So, I don't think everyone hand on heart can say that, and that they foster that. They trust each other, they trust organisations and us to support all this, and they have some confidence that harm and unfair treatment is taken seriously and people are held to account. So that's the end point, if you like, and that's probably the first bend after the start line. But hopefully that's how we can make that, I guess, a future reality. Change theory and that regulatory approach flexible enough to make sure that happens.
And is it important to you that leaders in partner organizations understand behavior change? I'm curious, even in terms of the language, right? Is it already embedded into the sector, you think? Or is there work to be done there for people to understand a bit more what we mean by behavior change, what it looks like, and the tools to get there?
There's a lot of work, because so far in the sport and recreation sector, integrity has been a kind of a bad word, and it means a lot of work, and it means trouble and risk and potential bad press and reputational damage. So to try and flip that to, these are steps we can all take, ultimately to prevent that, but actually because it's the right thing to do. And that's where the Te Ao Māori values come in around manaakitanga and whanaungatanga and all of those things, where if you get those right, and that's how you want to behave and have a good culture, then a lot of that other horrible stuff will take care of itself. So the leadership is hugely important. And I say that in the context of not just leaders and who are people, but sector leadership and organisations who are leading regional and community organisations. And my leaders in my organisation, we need to get that language really clear and repetitive. So what's in it for me with them? So get that urgency for change, and then also the FOMO, so fear of missing out. So if they see people, hang on, they've got a really cool policy, or they're getting that sort of support, or they're getting great results, what's happening, people looking over the fence. So sort of create that environment as well, because it's inherently competitive. The leadership is very important, because leaders need to model that behaviour, and they need to make the decisions about where the priorities are, where the investment is. I guarantee integrity is a pillar in everybody's strategy. I think if there was some critical work done around how it's showing up, it might not be as obvious. So, and it's got to start at the top, like everything.
So this is great, because we've talked now a lot about how the Commission as a whole fosters integrity within the sector, inspiring ethical behaviour within partner organisations. I'd like to shift to you, if you don't mind, as a leader yourself. As the CEO, you play a crucial role in fostering the type of culture within the Commission and beyond, of course, but within the Commission that will enable a positive ripple effect on the rest of the sector. Can we talk a little bit about you as a leader, your leadership style, and what has shaped it through the years and your career as an athlete, as a public sector leader? Where do you come from? What is your leadership style, and what's your ambition for the role?
Oh, it's a big question, Helene. Yeah, I think I've been hugely fortunate to grow up in Aotearoa, New Zealand. You move to New Zealand because it's so amazing. I was lucky enough to be born here, and that is, I've already struck the gold and struck the lottery. I know that puts me in a very fortunate position. And I grew up in Hawke's Bay in New Zealand, which is another beautiful part of the country, especially if you like fruit or wine. And yeah, that was a culture there. That's what you did in the weekends. Everything's 5 minutes away, very easy. So I grew up with a passion for sport, and was lucky enough to represent my country in cricket and football, and had a beautiful family who supported me the whole way. So understanding the corollary of all of that is that not everyone gets those opportunities and those choices. So I'm very clear about how fortunate I am. And I guess some of that, though, means I've probably at times reflected on instances in my life where I don't think I was a good teammate, or I don't think I was a good role model. So that's something I'm always, I guess, reflecting on for myself. And then as I bring that into leadership, in terms of a style, I'm not sure I have one other than it's very high trust. Like I think it's so important that you trust people to deliver what you've hired them to do, and either support them, but to the extent possible, get out of their way, because they're always going to be better at it than me, and you've got to empower them. So like, I know a lot of leaders would say that, but I'm in a position where I'm very aware of what I don't know. And I think that's hugely important. Everyone talks about learning and making sure that you're always upskilling, and I'm about finding things I don't know about. So, and how do I make sure that, we make the most of those? I like to think that I'm someone who supports and isn't big on hierarchy and that sort of thing. So, a very sort of supportive environment, and want to be approachable, so that if something goes wrong, people are prepared to tell me, and we can work on how to fix it together. So very much around process, and organisation has to be right. That's where things are won and lost. It's never a human error. I mean, I'm not saying human error doesn't exist, but if someone has made a mistake, it's because the process didn't support them. So it's something we take very seriously in the Commission. Our 4 values are kōtui, which is about demonstrating care and respect for each other in our mahi. Paihere, which is leading with integrity and purpose. So back to my comment before, is that we've got to model what we want the sector to pick up. And so that's taking responsibility. Tauwhiri, which is guidance and support, so people feel that safety and value, and they feel cared. And that's, again, about wrapping around people from that kākahu. And our last one is tukutuku, which is about valuing relationships and working collaboratively to create that culture. So it's interesting when we work through those, the consistency with people about what is important to them. So again, it gives me some confidence that we've got that right. Yeah, what kind of leader am I? I would just probably never think I've got anything right in terms of sorted or finished. So we always want to keep moving on. But I guess I want to be a leader that people want to work for, and that they understand that I have their backs and I support them. So that's enough about me.
It's wonderful. And I can't help to notice the parallel between, the values and your leadership style, the way you described it, with what it must like, because I have to say I have no personal experience, but as an athlete in particular in a team sport, right? I mean, you've talked about needing to trust others. You've talked about needing to, not to assume, but to observe and appreciate other people's strengths and the fact that they can do as well, if not better than you, and continuous learning and improvement. I mean, to what extent does this come from, your journey and your career as an athlete and from team sport?
Hugely. And I mentioned before about reflection at times when I thought I haven't been a good teammate. And that's exactly what I haven't paid attention to, is I've thought I can do everything. I've had unrealistic expectations of people. I've probably made them feel small or not valued. And that's when the team doesn't succeed. So to get to a place, and it took me some time, where you know that even if you don't have a close personal relationship with a teammate, that you trust them 100% to do their role, and you choose them over anyone else in the world to stand next to you in those situations. So I think that that's one thing I've definitely learned, is that is so important, and that you aren't going to foster that. If you need to rely on someone, you're not going to foster that by making them feel like they can't. So it's hugely important for that. And I think also through the earlier parts of my career is very much a law enforcement angle through police and other law enforcement agencies, and the power of good communication there was something I probably learned the hard way a few times. People are always driven by what they're afraid of, and that means that's what drives people to act or not act. I think understanding that as soon as you can with someone you're dealing with, or a teammate, or a friend, or a colleague, that helps you work together.
And in terms of how you ended up where you are now, I'd love to hear this story. I'd love to hear the details. You obviously at one of the key reasons why the commission came to be. Did you work towards this? Did you see this coming as you advocated for what you advocated and championed for what you championed? And did you think you would find yourself in the CEO's role at the commission? What was this experience like?
It was very iterative. No, I didn't think I'd be in the CE's role. Is it a dream job? Absolutely. I guess for the most part of my career, it didn't exist because we're only a year old. So it's not something I could, when I left school, just kind of aim for, because it simply did not exist. Again, having that balance of high performance sport experience and two codes, and meaning I'd come through two different high performance systems, and my experience in the justice sector was a good combination to lead to here. So I was able to be included in working groups, and the working group that set this up, which was led by our chair, Don McKinnon, who's now working with us still, was part of a good, passionate group of New Zealanders who work in this space, some of whom still work, and we don't always agree, but everyone wants the same results. So I was lucky to be swept along by that wave to an extent. And then again, fortunate to be given to be trusted to set the commission up in the 2-year transition phase, because that was where the legislation was born and the consultation. So that afforded me a lot of lessons, a lot of gaps I've identified, and that sort of thing. So it probably put me in a good position to apply for the CEO role. But again, I never take it for granted. There are lots of amazing people who could do this, and there will be after me, that's for sure. So that's probably how it all came together, but very much an unknown and a happenstance, which I felt extremely privileged to be here and love going to work every day. So part of that is the work, and part of that is the people, and be able to work with people who share the values. They're all very much ethics and values based, and that's what's important to them. That makes it not feel like work, and some days can't believe I get paid for it.
Wonderful. Sorry, I know you said enough about you, but
that's all right.
Do you think, back to my first question, do you think it is possible that the commission could work itself out of a job? I mean, should we hope for this? Or do you think 12 months in, it's such an important pillar for the sector that it will be enduring? Or don't we know?
Yeah, to be honest, I hope so. However, what I think realistically could happen, and what we should strive for over a longer period of time, is that triangle I talked about, the tippy top of it, and from an enforcement and kind of, that is the smallest portion, and that awareness raising doesn't have to be too big, but the education and that kind of willing compliance, if you like, is what actually keeps it alive. And so we're always learning as a sector, and there will always be different threats or different ways that those threats manifest, and things change, that hopefully in time, the commission can be much, much more about walking alongside people to help them before it gets to a point where they either make a mistake or are harmed.
And so expanding onto this, like maybe from more of a business question here, thinking within public sector, but also private sector, what are your views on the need for organization to invest into integrity? So is it important that organizations proactively, intentionally invest in integrity and ethics, thinking ethical behavior within organizations, ethical decision-making processes and culture? And can we link, you think, ethical behaviors to performance, whatever performance means for a given organization?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm biased because of what you've just heard for 40 minutes. I don't see how you get success or performance or outcomes without that. And if you do, there's a lot of carnage along the way, which I don't think anyone would be very proud of. That base, and from our experience, I can speak about the values and how we formed that. Like, I don't have to encourage people to, well, I may have to sometimes, but it's easy to know that people know what that is and it's tangible and so important that it is baked in from the start. It's in the strategy. It's not sort of something that you know, in an interview situation for recruiting that you have an integrity question in there, like, or an ethics question. And I know that that is a common practice and it probably is helpful. But my personal view is I think organisations will thrive a lot or are more likely to thrive if that is built in to what they do and into the people they have.
Yeah. And I suppose my follow-up question, and that links to the theory of change again, can we put a financial value on this investment, right? I mean, like we're talking monetary financial investment here. Should we do some more work? It's a difficult skill, but obviously there are experts out there working on it. Can we put a financial value on ethics, and should we all work towards having this financial value integrated into our theory of change?
Absolutely, because a lot of people talk about prevention and in its harshest form, target hardening, about trying to stop harm, but that's when it's already happening and it's already out there. So if you're hitting it much further upstream and you're investing right at the start, and whether that means you pay more to hire someone or you give them more resources around education, and personally that's what I think is understanding what people need to learn and how you can impart that to them. That is a huge, a huge benefit. I guess the issue arises when people go to a very pure return on investment model, because how do you quantify that? How do you say, well, X amount spent on ethics and integrity and values, what's it given us? But I think you've got to be a bit more mature than that and really look at your workforce and how they behave and the feedback they're getting, and to the extent you can put that down to your ethics and your integrity, I suspect it's a huge part.
And I think it's a good segue to another question of mine for you is, what is your advice to the future leaders in terms of their approach to integrity and ethics? Like what would you say to them in terms of becoming the leaders they want to be?
I think I'm trying to think of myself at 30 years old, which wasn't that long ago, or even younger actually. I think being really true to their values and understanding what those are early on, and young people of today are much better than my generation, for example, of articulating that and not being ashamed of it, not being ashamed of saying, I really value this thing, because that will draw you to other people with the same values. So I think that is probably something I'd say. And then just understanding that everyone is a leader, no matter what their role title is. It's a cheesy saying, but leadership isn't a title, it's a behaviour. It's so true. We've all worked with leaders with big titles that behave badly. It's maybe the youngest person in the office shows the most leadership in the times that matter. So I think that should be encouraged. So as a leader, being able to say to people, I don't care who you are or what your job is, you can lead. And that's about making sure, but the behaviours you exhibit, you're proud of and you would do whether someone was there or not. So, and lastly, I think probably my biggest lesson is you'll never know everything. If you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find another room, because you're probably not. And you don't know as much as you think you do. But for me, it's much more comfortable. I feel like I'm growing much more if I'm learning about things I don't know. And then you can start to evaluate how important they are and how much they fit with your values. I think ethics or integrity or values and morals, it's a set of behaviours and beliefs. We're trying to build something, whether it be an organisation or a code or a persona or a reputation that is sustainable and that people are going to want to be around and be a part of. Then that's the blueprint, no matter what you call it. So I think that we've covered all of that anyway, but I think we just bring it back to the core things, that's going to see you right.
Yeah, I love this, because it's almost impossible. Should we try to define what integrity or ethics look like when it's behavioral based? And maybe, I like this idea of, the regulation, the code, the definitions everyone can agree on, maybe the blueprint. But then there's this, like, the most important part is what happens around it. And it's almost we can't define. This is human behavior, like you said. This is learning. This is work in progress. Should we try and capture it? Because maybe we can't.
Exactly right. And so much of it is about how other people feel, not what you think about behavior and how it is. It's how it makes someone feel. Maya Angelou's been saying that for years. And so it's almost impossible to define, really.
Yeah.
And that's what we ended up saying. These are the things that can make people feel bad or feel harmed, no matter who they are and where they are. And they're right, discrimination, bullying, nobody likes that. And that will change over time. And, even within that, things that were acceptable 10, 15 years ago just simply are not anymore. And people, thankfully are much more in tune with their feelings and what makes them feel bad or feel harmed. And they can about it. So we've got a responsibility, particularly to our rangatahi and tamariki, to make sure that we give them their best chance to thrive.
So maybe ethical leadership is not something you are or you do, is something that you feel and you sense, and you make other people feel and sense.
I think so, yeah. And it's hard because you could go around asking people, how are you feeling today? But you get a sense, particularly if you're responsible for people, you get a sense of how they're showing up and how they're either retreating into themselves or something like that. Yeah. So I think it's a really good way to describe it. Actually, maybe you can't capture it, but you can know yourself that you're doing the same things that are important to you.
Yeah. And also, it requires being humble and brave to ask other people how you make them feel. And maybe this itself, is a good behavior. It's a good behavior to learn, to get better at asking others how you make them feel.
Yeah. And if they tell you, even better.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening. This was an episode of Ethical Leadership, Voices of Aotearoa, New Zealand, a podcast collection commissioned by the Brian Picot Chair in Ethical Leadership, Aritahi, at Victoria University of Wellington. I hope you enjoyed the episodes as much as I'm enjoying the fabulous conversations with our guest speakers. Stay tuned for more.